I do, but enjoy the classes and the opportunity to learn more about it. I'm Layla, and I'm a front-end web developer, but I also am learning back-end engineering. I don't know, I've been learning Ruby and Rails off and on for a few years, on very, whatever, but this year I've decided to focus more time on it, because I want to eventually change my job, do more either full stack stuff, or just really, I don't know, whatever.
Cool. I'm Anthony. I have about a year and a half of experience with Rails, and I really like Noisebridge, and I think this is a cool thing that you guys are doing, so I'm here to do it.
Cool, awesome. We have a pretty, this is probably the class with the most experience I've ever taught, so we'll see how I do. Y'all should think about teaching. You guys with Rails experience, this is how I started. I am not the world's Rails expert, but it's still cool. Usually there's at least something that I can teach people. There's definitely things that I learn every time. So you should do it. And also there's a front-end web development class, and there's other classes at Noisebridge, so this is a cool, fun thing to do. So let's get started. It looks like we have 2 folks at home as well. RailsBridge, cool, awesome, great. So it looks like we have a pretty good mix. So the topic of the class is our active record models. So I think this is probably like an advanced beginner / kind of early intermediate level class, because we are going to dig into one particular part of the Rails framework, but we're not going to dig terribly deep, at least for the beginning. I want to kind of go over some basics, and then depending on where we are and where our interests lie, I think it might be really fun to actually really dig into some particular part, like validations or external databases or the query interface or just all, so we can see where we go. Sound good? If you have questions, interrupt me or things like that, or things you want to talk about, keep it pretty informal. So a couple of other things. I have it on the whiteboard. The GitHub repo is here. I'll have this up. You can kind of clone in and follow if you want. Also, Dennis and I work together, and we are attempting to spin these RailsSchool classes into something somewhat more structured. One of our fellow teachers, Samir, teaches a course for people who are brand new to programming. So you can find him through the RailsSchool site.
That was
sorry. No. But we'll talk after. I'd love to hook you up with Samir. And
last week, wasn't it the same time?
That's correct. We change the topic every week, and we kind of flirt between sort of advanced things and really basic things, and we really don't have an agenda. But anyway, I will post some notes and some basic background stuff on my blog here. You can check it out. I'll update it tonight, and the link to that is on the whiteboard as well. Close these, and then if you don't know it, you should learn about this thing. This is the Rails guide, and this is where I always look if I need to know something about how active record works, how actually almost any component of Rails works. This is a great guide. It's a little bit less detailed than the actual sort of framework or language documentation, but it's detailed enough that it lets you, I think, figure out pretty quickly what you want to do. So I might refer to that. Cool. So I am in this little directory I made, and we're just going to spin up a new Rails app just to kind of give us a framework, and then let's create a simple model and start playing around with it. I thought the first thing we should do is kind of go over what we're talking about with models and active record, but I'll go pretty quickly over some of the basic standard things and maybe dig into some more of the advanced topics. Sound good? So you guys probably know this Rails new command. This is the command you're going to issue every time you make a new app. Usually you give it a string at the end of this, which is your application name, and it makes it in a new folder over there. But I already have a folder, so I'm going to try this thing, which I just looked up. Overwrite, get ignore. No. Cool, that seemed to have worked. So that gave me a generic Rails app in the existing folder, which is kind of cool. I don't know what it named it. I know. So we'll see that. And there we go. And I'll commit this and push it. You can either do it yourself or you can clone.
You might want to note that GC is.
Thank you.
It's an alias.
Thank you. This is an alias for git add. This is an alias for git commit. These are handy things you can do in your bash profile to save you some typing. And I finally did this, and it's pretty cool. And then I'm going to switch over to my editor here. A note about, this always gets people, I use RubyMine, which is an integrated development environment. It's heavy, it's way overkill. I actually use it because it's the, I like the text editor more than Sublime. But it's, an IDE is definitely not important for programming in Rails, and it's probably a hindrance to learning. So if you're new, I suggest using Sublime Text or Vim or something a little bit simpler than this. Cool. Everyone with me so far? I think so. Let's check the whiteboard. Cool. All right. So, howdy. Hey. I know you. Good. Have a seat. We're just getting started. So who wants to take a shot and explain what active record is? One of you guys, yeah, someone who hasn't, yeah, go for it, yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I understand there's something like a file management database that counts the existing things that you can inherit from, and basically it's doing all the human active.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. You might have been a little bit too expansive. It's not necessarily the database. It's more of an interface to the database, and it gives you, you're right, though, you get all this free, amazing stuff with it. Some of which is part of Ruby, and some of which isn't, and that actually can be really confusing. So I'll try to specify when things are part of Ruby or part or not. But to back up just a little bit, active record in Rails is basically the class that allows you to create models. Models being the M and MVC. Is everyone with me on that? Cool. So it really is just a thin interface for your database layer, and it's an object relational mapper. So what it allows you to do is take instances of your data and represent them programmatically. So if you think about it as a traditional SQL, an active record model will essentially, you'll have an active record class that will probably be related to a table, like users, customers, suppliers, and each instance of that class, each object instantiated by that class will represent a row. And of course, that object is going to have methods that correspond to the attributes or columns in that row. So it might be user first name, last name. It's also going to have methods that correspond to relationships. We'll go into that a little bit, but a user might have many accounts. So you have a method that corresponds to that. A supplier might belong to a region, for example, and you'll have a method that allows you to access that. So you can think about it as sort of an abstract programmatic sort of building of your database that allows you to interact with your database in a kind of pure Ruby way. At least that's how I think about it. Anyone want to offer any additional thoughts? Cool. It's also maybe the biggest, hairiest part of Rails, probably. Biggest, hairiest part of Rails, which is good and bad. So, so let's go ahead and let's just make ourselves a model, and we can start playing with some of this stuff. So, the first thing, though, before we're going to make a model is we need to make a database, and we need to make a migration of the database that's going to correspond to the model, right? So, I don't know if I have to do this because I'm using SQLite here, but I do. So you want to do rake db create. That's going to create a SQLite database on your computer. SQLite is a very simple file-based database. Doesn't require. Hey, thank you, Melissa. Awesome. Cool. Doesn't require a database server or anything like that, so it's really easy. Should we name our first model? Beer? All right. Sounds great. Create beers. That is awesome. We are a liquor store. Okay, so this command should be familiar to a lot of you guys. It's the Rails gives you a command to generate all kinds of amazing, wonderful things. I don't use it very often, but I do use it to generate my migration files. Anyone want to explain what a migration file is? Some of you guys know?
It's a way for Ruby to communicate with SQL purely through the Ruby language, and it creates it does the SQL for you. So you create a method that says create this table, create beers. And, it'll be this sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, my brain.
That's okay.
At this point, but it's just a way for you to communicate with the database using Rails instead of SQL.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I put a slightly finer point on it in that migrations are individual files that are stored in your application, and they're ways to manage incremental changes to your database. So if you're halfway down a project and you're like, oh man, we needed to add 2 columns to this model, you would create a new migration to add those columns. You wouldn't go back and edit the original migration or anything. So the thing I think to remember about migrations, they're there to manage the incremental changes to your database. There's another file called schema.rb, and that kind of controls the overall picture of your database. So just something to remember. Migrations sort of it's like a change log of your database, if you will, and the schema is sort of the authoritative kind of copy. So if you ever needed to just recreate your database from whole cloth in a new system, you probably want to use the schema, not the migrations. Want to create a migration?
I have an immediate question, actually.
Yep.
And this is tripping up in my own Rails learning. There are certain conventions that Active Record expects.
Exactly.
And which are enforced or complained about by Active Support, which is the module that figures out all the pluralization and all that other sort of weird stuff. So you've just created a migration create beers.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the migration doesn't necessarily need to correspond to the model name exactly, right?
No, but there is some stuff in there. You're right. Yeah, for sure.
So maybe you should just go ahead.
Want me to kind of explain?
But what I was just wondering when you were just placing everything up there to begin with was why the migration was called create beers rather than simply beers.
That's a good question. See if I got that right. It actually would probably matter not. There is some convention going here and here, but it's not maybe the most critically important. Dennis is referencing something pretty common to Rails. You guys with Rails will know this. It likes its conventions, and woe to you who violates these things. One of the conventions is that table names are plural, while model names are singular. We'll see this in a minute. So that is why it's beers, not beer. And one of the conventions in Rails is that table names are plural, while the class name, the active record class names are singular. Now that being said, you won't really deal with the table name that much because it's mostly going to be abstracted via active record. But like Dennis said, the SQL table name is going to be beers. Beers, plural with an S. And the pluralization engine is usually pretty smart. It knows the Y, IE kind of business. I guess beer is also a plural here, so we'll see how it goes.
But there's the note that I just bring up there because I've done some ports before from other people's codes and discovered whoa, this whole thing is not working. Well, I can spend hours and then
Yeah,
discover
yeah,
it's
yeah.
a pluralization issue.
Yeah.
So the warning to any beginners working on this is just be wary that there's certain, that matters sometimes, whether something's plural or not plural, and you may have to just Google to look it up.
Yep.
And it's probably in the Ruby guide somewhere, but it's, I forget for any particular instance, what's going on. And generally, when creating a migration, I'll just name it as the object and then look it up. Is that it's supposed to be plural? And I believe it's supposed to be plural, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And also, to be honest, this really doesn't matter. This is just being used to make this. We can go in a second. We'll go and see the actual migration.
Yeah.
So
I want you to get off.
Yeah. But this is a good thing. Another convention of another good convention is this camel case to snake case. You'll see that a lot in Rails. This is equivalent to writing same thing, which is equivalent to writing using the shorthand G. So you might see that. I just because this is the way I do it. Yep. No, I know. Yeah, it's funny. There's quite a bit of stuff. Also, as a budding Rails programmer, I will tell you, it is good to figure out your way of doing things and always do it the same way, or your team's way. And sometimes the two ways are equal, but doing it the same way every time is just nice. So all this has done is create a file. So let's go look at the file. Migrations are stored in the DB folder in migrate. And you can see it gives us a timestamp, a date stamp on the beginning of the file. Oh yeah, okay. So that actually turns into that, but like it doesn't really matter. Yeah. I'm sorry.
But then it's a plural class name.
Which to be, I don't know. Do any of you do it? Does anyone? I don't really think that class name actually matters. I could name it Space Aliens, and I think it'd be cool, right?
Yeah, because you're not really going to interact with this.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's just living in the migration.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think it really matters. Yeah, I know it's one of those weird things. This matters. That's where the table name comes from. So you want to look at that. If that has anything really funny in it, like that, it would probably be a good. You should probably just regenerate the migration or something. Cool, with me so far? So I'm going to speed through this a little bit, I think, although if people are learning, then we should stay. So the migrations have changed a little bit in the last versions of Rails. And so this is Rails 4, and so if you're used to Rails 3, you probably see a slightly different syntax. You'll see this is a class, just like any other class. It descends from active records migration subclass. And there's one method called change. And when you tell Ruby to migrate the database, it's going to call this method, which is basically doing this pretty obvious loop then, right? And it's going to loop through, and it's going to create this table. And the syntax here is you basically do something like this. You could do it. There's a lot to this. I don't want to get in. I didn't actually prepare to get in the details of migrations, so I figure we'll just make a few columns here, maybe add an index and go on. So this line right here is going to create a column called name, type string, and default it to an empty string. Make sense? You can the types that you have are actually controlled by your database. Most databases have a string type, right? Yeah. Most databases have an integer type. So let's call it quantity. Let's do that. And let's add a couple more. What else do we want to know about our beers? I was going to say that, yeah. So that is probably a decimal, right? ABV. I use Postgres really on a day-to-day basis, so I don't know what SQLite's going to do with that, but I think it's probably going to be okay. All right, any other? Ah. Does anyone know how to do timestamps? Yeah, thank God for Rails. We don't have to think too much about that. This little thing is going to give us what are called the magic columns, which is created at and updated at, and this is just going to happen magically. We don't have to think about it or worry about it until we need it, which is super handy. But if you don't put that there, you don't get them. It sort of surprises me why you have to even do that. Nod to our Germanic friend here. So we can differentiate the ones from the motherland versus the new ones. Cool. Any thoughts on these?
Do you have to specify a default?
No, you don't, actually. That's a great question. I do, and the reason is because checking for nil values in my things drives me freaking sane. So the reason I do this, the reason I have a database layer default in name, is that I know, or let's say country of origin. Let's say we have a way our users don't have to specify a country of origin for their beer, right? So if you didn't have this, and no one specified a country of origin, and you tried to, in some view, say beer.country of origin, and put that somewhere, you get a nil value, which can cause it to blow up. And this drives me nuts. There's a couple ways to deal with that. One is to, in your database layer, make sure it's an empty string all the time, because then you'll get an empty string instead of nil, and that at least the same. Yeah.
You ever get the one nil type, the lowercase nil, or you get the uppercase nil, or is it?
In Ruby, there's only one nil, and it's nil. Yep, and nil is nil, and it all. And the problem with nil is you can't call methods on nil, but you can call methods on empty string, like blank. So you might want to do. You can see something where you'd want to do like if country of origin is blank, right? I'm just doing pseudocode. Then do something else. Do something else. But if your country of origin is nil, that is blank method is going to blow up, probably. So I like the empty string, or also or a method called length. You can't call length on nil, but you can call length on an empty string. You can also do defaults using active record callbacks. That's another option I've done in the past, where you basically go through and you're like, if anything's nil, make it an empty string or 0. So you, instead of doing it in the database layer, you can do it in the active record layer. You can also do it in a form if you really want to be kind of weird about it. You know, you could default forms to empty strings, but I kind of prefer to do it at the lowest level. I don't know if anyone has any. I mean, do you guys do it differently for any reason, or don't find this to be an issue, or?
Well, one little trivia fact is Rails actually monkey patches nil to allow you to call blank on it.
Oh, okay. So that was a bad example. I thought that.
But it's kind of a bad convention to get used to because outside of Rails it doesn't exist. So, no, this is great. Yeah. Actually wish I had done this more, because I ended up writing more defensive code to deal with that.
Yeah, because otherwise you just write all these nested if statements or something like that. If nil, then don't do this. But yeah, so. Okay, cool. Any other thoughts? Obviously, if you have a different column type, the default values are different. Should go without saying. So now that I've written this, I actually need to run it, and the command to do that is rake db migrate. And for those of you new to the Ruby world, rake, little trivia, who knows what rake stands for?
Ruby?
Yeah. Which is weird because it kind of doesn't really have anything to do with GNU Maker, I don't know, but anyway, it does database stuff and then also various sundry tasks. Cool. If you call rake db migrate, Rails is going to remember what migrations have been run in the past, and it's just going to run the new ones for you, which is cool, right? And you can see it seemed to work. It created a table, and everything is sane. Sometimes those will blow up on you, and because you have a syntax error or something, it's pretty obvious. Since I mentioned the schema, this command will load the entire schema. So let's say you have I'm going to try to think of a good example. Let's say you needed to nuke your database in an existing project and start over, or you wanted to install it on a new instance of your server or something like that, and you had 45 migrations. You wouldn't just run all those migrations. That'll cause some problems. You would do rake db schema load, and it would basically create your database from whole cloth right there. So that's a good one to remember. And also, it's good to remember your schema file, because that is going to tell you with a little bit more verboseness what's actually going on in your underlying database. Cool.
And schema is the authoritative accumulation.
So we want to go ahead and run that command.
That's a great way to put it, Dennis. Yeah, go ahead and run. No, don't run break schema. Don't run schema load. I don't know what will happen, but don't do it. Hopefully nothing bad. But so right now, what we have done is we've used active records migration capability to create a table and add some columns to it. So now we have a database with one table called beers. With me so far? But what we don't have is any sort of programmatic or Ruby interface to this. And so this is not very helpful because now all we can do is type SQL commands, and who wants to do that? So having done this, what we want to do is we want to give it a little active record love, and then we can have all these wonderful shortcuts to this data. So active record models live in the models directory. Okay, everyone cool at home? Good. In your app, as of course. Now people will do things like this is where I differ from some people. People use Rails generation capabilities to generate models. Just like I generated that migration, you can use it to generate a model file. You can use it to generate a controller, views, or a whole app if you want. I tend to not do that. I only use the Rails generate method for migrations, mostly because it does this funky name thing in front of it. I prefer to make my stuff by hand. This is just a preference. Although as a general rule, I don't think professional Ruby programmers tend to use the scaffold, the blog in 5 minutes type of things, because it creates all this junk code. So I'm just going to create a new file, not a directory. This is going to be called beer.rb. It's the singular, right? No, go away. Well, this is a good time to do a little git status. Do a little git commit. Now we have a beer.rb file, but it doesn't really do much. Cool. So the first thing is we're gonna make it an active record model really easily by using the Ruby class definition keyword. Active record models are classes. We're going to give it a capital letter name. That's the convention in I think all of Ruby for class names. And we're going to have it descend from active record base. And then I get at my end. And to compare this to the migration class, you notice it's pretty similar. Whoops. These are simple, plain old Ruby classes that descend from this monolithic active record business. Yep.
I'm sure you're going to get into this, but one of the things I always get confused about is the active record : base, and then active record : something else.
Yeah.
Sort of like that for migration. And so, how often do you know whether to use : base or some other suffix?
In practice, I just remember. But there's an answer to your question, though. Does anyone want to actually answer it?
Well,
not to pick on you, I'm sorry.
No, I've actually never created a model the way you're doing it right now. I've always created the model with the generate, and it creates the migration file for me, and then I've edited the migration.
Got it.
So, I mean, this is fine. This is cool. So that's actually a really good question because I don't know. I just know that when I create my models, active record base is already there.
Right, and then I would start doing things like base, and then something was supposed to be migration, and just like, what is what and how.
Okay, cool. Well, that's actually a great point to make sure people know is you can use that generate command to actually specify all those attributes in one command, and then it'll and then just go look at it.
I mean, it's cool to do it this way, I think. But
it's just different.
Active record base is, I think, also is it the lowest form of. So the less than symbol is the sign for it says that it's inheriting from active record base.
Mm-hmm.
And by choosing active record base, we're also choosing like the lowest level of the active record that really applies to what we're doing. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, to be specific, this colon is a namespace resolver. right? And so what that's saying is that we're gonna inherit. This class is actually going to inherit from a class called base, which is inside a class or a module called active record. And you'll actually see this in some cases. I actually had, to give you an example, I had to write an application that talked to ActBlue, which is a way for people to give money to Democratic political campaigns. And in ActBlue, you have a concept called a campaign. But my application also had a model called campaign. So in my library that I basically did a class active, class act blue, and then a class, actually I did this, and then class campaign, right? And then how I could refer to this class outside my app, and that helped my app know that, hey, when I say this means the campaign class inside the ActBlue module, as opposed to the active record campaign class. I think of these things as just sort of code organization structures. And module, you can think of in this case module being essentially a substitute for a class. So to answer your questions about which to know, you do sort of have to remember. Although, if you think about it, it's like, oh, this is inheriting from the migration class inside of Active Record, and this is just inheriting from the base. Which, so.
Yeah, and if it's any consolation, I think, at least when you're first starting out, you probably won't interact with any other Active Record classes besides base and migration for a little while. And maybe you'll see serializer, but, so you're talking about 3 total. So, as long as you learn those, you're good for a while anyway.
Top of vanilla and strawberry.
Exactly.
Cool. So, are we good so far? I think we should play with this new class and see what we got for free, just from Active Record. So I'm just gonna fire up the Rails console, and Rails console is just a way to sort of, you can think about it shelling into your app, and so you have a Ruby console with all your Rails stuff around. So all the classes that you made inside your Ruby app are available to you in your console here. Yep.
Did you add any code in there? I didn't see.
No, nothing. Oh, nothing. So let's just do that's weird. What did I leave out of my beer class here? Okay, for some reason I wasn't hooked up to the SQLite database, but I am now. So if I just type the class name beer, you can see I get a little descriptor from my console here that tells me all of, you can basically see the columns and the data types. What's that?
I gotta say there.
Yeah, just do beer. Actually, could anyone think of the top of their head?
Do beer.connection and it'll run the same script.
What did I mess up? Why is it yelling at me?
I really don't know, but I imagine.
And then back in beer again? Is it lowercase beer?
It's uppercase beer.
Uppercase.
Yeah, I've seen the errors.
So do beer,
Yeah.
and then enter.
Yeah, beer.connection.
That's not a connection.
Yeah, and for some reason it wasn't opening up a default connection to the database. Oof, boy.
So, back to your definition. Which error were you getting there?
Oh, cool. So it told me it's so for some reason it's mad because yeah, my Rails is mad at me because I haven't, for some reason, it's not actually connected to the database server. So there's obviously a configuration file wrong somewhere, but it seems to work fine just by doing this. So.
Just try beer first. Now do beer.
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
We'll look at the last SQLite thing I did to see if I'm missing something in any of the models. Yeah, that's weird. Anyway. Okay, everybody good? That was just so if you got that at home and you're like, that would be a problem you'd probably want to address on your project. It has something to do with the database connection not being set up, probably because I kind of blasted through that without thinking much about it. So by calling beer.connection, this is actually a class method, undoubtedly provided by Active Record, that sets up a database connection with beer in the database, and so that magically worked, and so that's cool. With me so far? Cool. So let's make a new beer object. Let's put some beer in the database. Or actually, let's see first. Let's see. Let's look. What if we just want to see what beers we have in the database? We can call the .all class method, which comes from Active Record. And we have nothing. But you can see, if I take this and I put it in a variable, what it's giving me back is it's giving me a specific type of collection called Active Record Relation. Right? So that's the one thing to know. When you use Active Record to query your database, the thing that you're going to get back in most times is an Active Record Relation object, or an object of that class, which usually descends from array. So most of the array methods that you have in Ruby are going to be available, like count, right? Each, that kind of thing. But because it's an Active Record Relation, you also get some. You also get a lot of other really cool Ruby methods or Rails methods, which we can look at after we have some actually beers to play with. Cool. So that's cool. Well, let's make a beer. So let's do a new beer. All we really have to do is call the new class method from Active Record, and that's going to instantiate a new beer object for us. Cool. Now, it doesn't really have any attributes. You can see ID is nil. So that tells us right there that this is not saved in the database yet. So that's good to know. This actually comes up a lot, by the way. If you ever are dealing with, in your Rails application, you're like making a new object because you're having a user edit it, you don't get the ID until you actually save it in the database, which is a giant pain in the ass for callbacks if you want to have the ID. So that's something to note. You can see created at and updated at are also nil. ABV, we get this big useless big decimal thing, which is how Rails represents decimals, which is an endless source of annoyance to me. Also, in stock defaults to 0, and we have the database defaults here. So if we want to override that, let's say, give me a beer, guys.
Lagunitas.
Thank you. Did I get that right? Lagunitas. Cool. And I can type new beer again, and I can see that it stored the name Lagunitas in the Ruby object. Cool. And then let's do. We have 24 of them, and then country. No, that's probably too much. Cool. So now I've made a all I've done really right now is I've just made a Ruby object, and these names are simply object attributes, like any plain old Ruby object in the world. But where it gets really cool is if I just do this, Active Record throws in the database, and you can see we have some cool stuff. It's going to package this stuff into a single database transaction, which is kind of nice. It's going to create a bunch of SQL. So if you're into SQL, you really, really want to know what's going on under the hood or whether things are sanitized or not, you can kind of look at that, or you can ignore it happily. It's giving me some timestamps, and then it's giving me a boolean. It returns this call returns a boolean that tells me whether or not it was saved or not. So oftentimes you'll do something like this, right? This is a typical Rails thing where you say, look, if if you successfully save this in the database, then tell the user, congratulations, we got new beer. If not, then redisplay the form or send an alert or something like that. But that is just a function of the fact that the save method returns Boolean, true or false. Cool. What does anyone know? So let's say it just said false. Let's just pretend. Does anyone know what you would do to figure out why it didn't save?
Call new beer.errors.
Totally.
Which will give you a list of errors that Rails tend to do.
And then you can also, I usually put the full messages.
Yeah, that's right.
And let me throw that on the whiteboard. This is something that kind of got me when I was learning. We're saving AR, short for active record. This is a common gotcha. In my experience, mostly dealing with either callbacks or validations, right? So in the real world, you're going to have a series of validations, and we'll get into that in a minute. That validate your data. Like you can't have. So for example, like you can't have a negative number for beers in stock. That might be a good thing to code into your program, right? Lest you give customers money or something stupid, right? This is something you're going to have to deal with. And as your application grows, you're going to have a lot of these things, and then you're going to have somewhere, someday, you're going to be doing the CSV import, and everything's going to fail, and you're going to have no idea why. And in my experience, like 98% of the time, if you just do errors got full messages, it'll say, oh, zip code is too short. So, cool. So, we'll do another. So now that we have a beer. If we do beer.all, we actually get something back, which is cool. Let's do another beer. What's this one gonna be, guys? Oh my God, how do you spell that?
It's red house in English, translated to English.
Will you permit that?
It's on the Black Forest.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we're gonna do whoa, what did I do? Oh, it's because it's not beer, it's new beer. What do you think? Maybe alcohol.
All
All right, you're... Okay, cool. So we have two beers. And let's do, well, this is probably enough. All I've done is put two beers in the database, and then I've created a variable called beers that gives me back an active record relation. And you can kind of see right here that this is really an array of beer objects. Does that make sense? Cool. You can do things like O. Did I get that right? She's not O? Yeah, okay, cool. You were asking about the difference between what is native Ruby and what is Rails foolishness. Actually, it's really cool. Adding all these awesome things onto it. There's a good way to. Here's an example of that. So here's that first. Will give us the first beer in the array, just like Ruby. But active record gives us that. Wow. Beers.seconds would be awesome. So that second method is not available in core Ruby, but is available in Rails. Yeah, we should actually. That'd be a good. How would you? Yeah, we can use that as an example. You can do beers.last. I think that's also native Ruby, right? That's not a Rails thing. So In my experience, like I haven't, I mean, I don't really. That's just what I remember. And some things, it's like if you happen to be doing Ruby outside of Rails and stuff blows up on you, it's a good guess. Especially if it's a method designed to save you a lot of time to cheat, to make things really kind of Railsy, like second or humanize. I think is a Rails.
Yeah.
There's a method called humanize that will take something like new beer and make it new beer. Yeah, that's a Rails. Doesn't that just kind of smell Railsy? I feel like.
This one, what version of Blueberry do you right
I
now?
don't know.
Latest. Gotta be new, right?
I probably should pay attention. I don't know. I need to look at that.
2.2 is out.
I don't think I'm going to be doing anything that
But none
shouldn't.
of this is particular.
This should work on 1.9. Yeah, this is or probably before that. Cool. Well, I thought. So the point of that really is that we get all that for nothing. You see, that class beer, all of that stuff we did comes from active record base. So all that stuff that basically is an interface to the database layer, we get for free. But we can add all sorts of additional cool awesomeness to our model to make it even more powerful. So is everyone cool with me here? And then I thought maybe we should choose a particular area of awesomeness to add and to dig into, because there's way too many to go into. But before, any questions on the kind of the basics of migrations? Cool.
Maybe you could show real quick how to instantiate an object all at the same time instead of line by line.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Create with all the attributes already. Oh, I didn't realize you.
No, that's cool. That's a great. Let's do a couple of different alternative syntaxes for making things. Fun. What is it? 4.5 probably. Cool. This would also do it, right? Except it doesn't actually save this beer in the database. That can be useful sometimes. But let's say you actually wanted to just make a whole, let's say we're being really lazy. We could actually do this, which is cool. Create will actually instantiate it and save it in the database at the same time. So that's cool. That's really handy sometimes. Another handy thing about creating new active record objects is you can bang it. This will instantiate a Ruby object, save it in the database, and throw an exception if it doesn't save for whatever reason. One of the problems with using create is it will silently fail. Let's say you have a script to generate sample data in your app. You could have 13 things and 3 of them fail because of validations, and you run the script and it's like, oh yay, and you don't know. So usually people will use bang to blow it up, so you know, or in creating factories for testing or things like that. Whoop. And then there's another couple other things. That does what you think it do. Anyone tell me the difference between destroy and delete?
Destroy all the callbacks.
Yeah.
And delete does not have after destroy callbacks.
That's right.
So Rails gives you these hooks. Like, let's say there's some code you want to do when you delete a record in your database. Let's say you have a user and that you delete the user and you want to send them an email saying they're no longer part of your site or something like that. So Rails gives you hooks that will run when you delete those rows in the database, but they only run if you call destroy rather than delete, or the other way around.
No, you got it. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
I want to note the mnemonic that helps you remember that, because It's all the time. It's like
You know what it is for me?
Google search. What is it?
It was a woman somewhere who was complaining about like the aggressive maleness of destroy. I was like, it's kind of a funny point, destroy. So I was thinking it's just hilarious. Yeah, but it's totally random.
So from that you take destroy calls to callbacks.
Yep.
Yes? Okay.
Because it's like more. I don't know. You just got to remember it. Use destroy. The convention is you start writing controller methods. The convention controller method to govern this is also destroy. So that kind of helps you remember. Also, though, we have, and this is also very helpful. You have a class method that will nuke your table while calling callbacks up. So if you wanted to, let's say you had a user table of 10,000 users, and for whatever stupid reason you needed to destroy and repopulate them, boy, if you did destroy all, you'd send all 10,000 people an email saying they weren't part of your database anymore, which would kind of suck. And it would just happen probably. I made that mistake once, and it's like, oh shit, and it's how fast can you hit Control-C? So that will delete everything in your database without running callbacks, which also though could be bad. Let's say in some cases you have a model and it's associated with an API somewhere, and you need to delete that record as well. Well, if you did delete all, you'd have your API database full of all these crafty records that now point to nothing. So you want to kind of think about your callbacks in your model. There's a ton of this stuff in Active Record. Yep. And that's where that guide is a really good thing. I actually find it's pretty readable. If you're ever stuck on an airplane, just read through some of it. You'll learn about this stuff. Any other questions? No, callbacks might be a subject to dig into.
Update, yeah.
Oh, update attributes. That's a good one.
You've almost done all the CRUD.
I've almost done all of CRUD. So let's see. Is old beer still here? Okay, let's see. Old beer. Let's see. Empty beer equals beer.find 3. Find, of course, is pretty obvious, right? It's a class method. It takes as an argument an ID, but you can also do things like beer.where, name. But again, you know, we could spend an hour just listing all these methods.
Those are the two probably most common ones right there.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Where is this where syntax? There's a lot of varieties, but it takes as an argument a hash.
Didn't in Rails there used to be more helper wheres, and then they got more restricted?
Oh, it did. Yeah, we can talk about that. There's actually a gotcha here. Does anyone know the gotcha with where? Well, I know which. Yeah. God damn it. Yeah. Okay, so let's say you had a thing in your database where you know you only had like one German beer, and you wanted to like find it, but you didn't really know the ID, but you knew it was a German beer, right? So you're thinking, oh, I'll just call, you know, and then it's like beer.where.countryoforigin.id. Oh, it doesn't like that. And it's because where returns a relation or a collection or an array, which is not one thing but many, even though if it's only one.
Right.
So there's a couple of hacks. You could do like this. And that gives you a singleton object. Okay, so that's kind of cool, but you know it's also kind of dumb because it's like just whatever happens to be the first one. Does anyone know well, Dennis alluded to the I think a superior backdoor, and it is the find by methods. In older versions of Rails, you had something like this. Find by name. Thank you. Not a colon. There we go. Parentheses are optional in Ruby, in most cases. Cool. Okay, that worked. This is actually deprecated, though. The preferred method is that. So instead of so what this means is that you guys probably noticed the implicit thing here is that every column that we told the migration about, active record gives that attribute to the objects, right? So you also used to get a find by column name. You could have 500 column names. You'd have 500 find by methods. The new way you do that is you have one find by method, which takes a hash as an argument, and where the key is the column name, and the value is the search criteria, and you still get the one singleton object back. Questions about that? You can run. Getting over a cold.
You call it? It's a singleton object?
I think I'm saying that right, but I'm using that word wrong. I'm studying some stuff. By singleton object, I mean that I get back an instance of I get back one active record object, whereas if I use where, I get that collection. Yeah, and you just want to be careful. You just want to know what you're getting back because that'll determine what methods you can call on it. And I think the biggest gotcha is when you look for something that you think you should find one of, but you use where, you get an array no matter how many it comes, even if it's 0. So if you then want to take anything from where and actually do anything with it, you need to extract it from the array in some fashion, or use the find by methods. Cool. And then let's see the last thing. Cool. There's a method called update attributes, and that takes a hash, and then you can do stuff like this. That changed the database. If I do that, it's actually smart enough to have reloaded that object in memory, and I have updated that. You notice it didn't overwrite anything I didn't tell it about. Right? Does that make sense? Update attributes is simply a method you can call in any active record object that takes as an argument a hash. And if the hash corresponds to a column name or a method name, it'll update those attributes. This is commonly used because you can guess if you were making a web form where you're editing a database object and you wanted to supply some edits and throw that at the database and update it at once. That's not safe to do in practice, but that's sort of what's happening here. Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about the turquoise line there of SQL, where it's asking you to set in stock where your time loading is, and then it looks like it's taking the in stock over there, and it's like an array within.
Oh yeah, this I don't know SQL very well. What it's doing is it's calling an update action, and this says set, and this is an attribute, and then equals, and then it is passing it over here. What I know about this pattern is that this is what you'll see in Rails in some cases, or in sort of PHP or some of the older languages. It's sanitizing the inputs. Instead of directly sending what I'm giving it right into the SQL, it's throwing it off to the right and sanitizing it. Is that fair? Okay, yeah. But
So it's
oh.
Rails is preventing you from injecting raw SQL into your database, which could potentially harm it. So it's sanitizing it by creating. You'll see that format quite a bit with the question marks, and then the next array says this is where it's at. So you can look at that first array. The question mark is the first object in the next array, and so on and so forth.
So it's actually adding pointers to a second array?
Yeah, if you go back to the so in stock on the white, it's pointing to the 0 index in that array right there, and then the updated goes to the next one, and those are the only two that matter because
What's being updated?
Updated technically was updated. If that makes sense. My brain doesn't work at this time.
You won't need to use this that much in day-to-day Rails programming unless you want to drop down to the SQL layer for some sort of reason.
I was just going to say arrays.
Oh, cool.
Not far enough in, not just calling methods on things, but now then that could be arrays within arrays or knowing destructive, non-destructive.
Don't get confused about this. This is not a Ruby array in here. So I don't think.
Yeah, that's a simple thing.
It is an array. There's nothing was said wrong, but
But the typical, like, here's the 2-second sanitization thing, because this is something I learned only after doing a lot of PHP and after the fact, and writing a lot of stuff that was incredibly bad. This is 15 years ago, of course. Is you know, you would take some input. Yeah, exactly this. Yeah, as the comedy case points exactly that. You would usually just write code, basically, right? That where you parameterize some SQL, right? But the thing is that if you have a form that came in that said, okay, here's the end of the SQL statement with a close quote, and then add in a semicolon, and then do things like drop table or get min access, you're doing what's called the SQL injection.
Right, which I've heard of all this.
Yeah, so that's all that is actually, is to be able to say I'm going to close. I'm parameterizing and bringing in as a variable something that I want to be able to pull into SQL. But if you're tricky, you can say, well, here's some variable, some number, doesn't matter what it is. Close it to say that's the end of the statement. And so since SQL allows you to chain stuff together, you can add a semicolon and then start adding in your own command sets, right?
look, I just did it right there.
Yeah, like that. Right.
So let's say you had a web form and you're like, give me the name of the beer, and you type that.
Yeah.
And I threw that into the query.
Yeah.
That would wreck my database.
Yeah.
So Rails takes care of this for you.
You don't want that ever to be permitted inside of Rails or any other. Yeah.
Yep.
Particularly, the semicolon that just interpreting anything that came in via a form in that way. Yeah, you can put and it will execute, and then your code will execute. It's like, whoops, it doesn't know any better. So the term that's used to prevent that is sanitization
Of the SQL.
of the SQL injection. That's right.
Of the user input.
Of the user, of the user
to prevent
input,
SQL
yes.
injection.
Like, we know that we're doing this ourselves. Like, Rails doesn't know. Rails would use the same update attribute or update attributes command to take information and update our database. And we know that we're doing it right, but Rails doesn't know, so by default, all of them are made that way. So that you can never, technically, you're not supposed to ever be able to get raw data into the database without it first being sent.
You can basically think about it as if it's coming from a user, it is not trusted ever. But Rails will more or less, I think now with 4, take care of that even for cross-site scripting and pretty much any occurrence, I think. So I think you don't necessarily need to be you should know what it is, but as a day-to-day programmer in Rails, for better or worse, you don't have to worry about it. I think probably some day-to-day Rails programmers don't know what it is. But
that's why you see this funky syntax, because there's something, even though that's SQL, you see somewhat similar stuff in other Rails classes.
Yeah, it's protecting me from myself even on the console level. So, if you just Google SQL injection, there's actually tons of really awesome things about it, and you can read about it, and it's kind of fun. You're like, oh my god, that's horrible. The other thing, the other side of that is, let's say you're asking you at a notes field, and someone put some JavaScript in there, right? And that would just like be thrown out into someone's browser. You don't want to trust that either. So anything coming from the user. Anything coming from the user is considered toxic and bad, which is one of the really nice things about Rails, that you don't have to continue to do that every time. That's a related thing, but it's not a SQL injection thing. Yeah. But there is a similar. Cool. Are we good there? Should we do some?
You covered CRUD.
I think. And like there are 10,000 CRUD kind of methods. The guide has the great ones. Update attributes, create, new, destroy are the big ones. And remember that all of these return booleans, so you can use them in if statements, which is really cool. Rails is really nice, like Ruby's really nice like that. You can do something. That's stupid. Right. whatever. This right here, this will actually save the record and return a Boolean, so you can combine the actually saving the record and an if statement in the same line. This is a common pattern you see in a controller, or anytime you're trying to put data in the database and you want to make sure it's there. Does that make sense? This is, I think, probably the basic stuff for CRUD. That works too, same thing. Actually, and also,
what are typical conditions?
Destroy returns a Boolean as well.
You get the else, or you would fail. Is he
Mostly for validations in my experience.
oh, validation?
Yeah, mostly in validations. So what do you guys think? So we could do validations, and validations are about controlling the quality of data that gets in your database. We could do relationships if we want, and we could do callbacks. And a couple other. Any thoughts? We could do scopes.
I go with validations or callbacks.
Yeah,
But validations.
Validations are great. Yeah,
Yeah.
Why don't we do that?
Let's do some validations. Cool.
Kind of necessary.
Yeah. And callbacks are like the worst thing that new Rails programmers do.
So we could do relations.
Yeah, I feel like, no, it's like let's just not even suggest callbacks.
Relations is going to take 2 hours.
Yeah.
No, let's do validation. Let's try some validations,
Like one
guys.
type you could do. Like, one type of relation. in maybe an hour.
So something I do, I comment my model files with 2 pounds in capital letters. It's completely arbitrary. Do it or not, I don't care. But I like to break up my models. So what do we mean when we talk about validations? Validations are actually a callback, which is a set of code that's executed before data is inserted into the database. So validations are called on create and update attributes. I think. I don't think the validation code, I'm talking about validations as a concept, right? We'll write it in several lines. The code we're about to write will only be called when we're inserting a new record into the database or updating it. It won't be called when we instantiate a new object or when we destroy. Sort of intuitive, but just to kind of clarify. Cool. And we use this to make sure our data is sane. So we get to write validations by saying validates, which is awesome. And then the first thing we do is we use a symbol to tell Rails about the attribute that we want. Cool? So that's a pretty easy way to start. I really like this. And then after the attribute name, we get to pass a whole set of arguments. I've actually started formatting my, well, yeah, we'll leave it like this. Cool? This is pretty clear what this does, right? This will make it so that we can't save a new beer object unless we have a name. And presence is smart. My empty string default will fail this validation. So the name actually has to, I think under the hood, I think it's calling the length method on the string. I think. But that's what blank is doing under the hood too. I think. It's calling length. Right?
I don't know.
Okay, that wasn't a question. Okay, cool. C is short for console. So let's do this. I like to do my things like this instead of in one line, just so I don't have to remember as much. Equals 24. Oh man, rejected. Dot errors. Dot whoops. Okay, cool. So that's pretty straightforward there, right? Everyone with me so far? What we did? We just made our application require name before it saves anything. So if we do this, Now everything's happy. Pretty straightforward, right? Cool. Let's make this a little bit nicer, though. Let's say we had a user spec that we needed some sort of custom error message because this is the Mr. T beer app. Cool? Each Rails, this is something that's pretty cool. Each Rails validation, each validator, this keyword allows us to write multiple different types of validations. We can add on length and all that. So each one of those things, the presence, the length, you can do numericality, you can do a lot of different, anything you can think of that would validate data, you can do. Each one of those can take either true or false, or it can take a hash of arguments. Hash is truthy in Ruby, so this actually works. So this is cool. So if we go back to I did. That's weird. Oh, anyone know what happened? Yeah, I needed to reload the console to pick up the changes in my. When you change some code in Ruby, like the model files, you need to reload that, and so you can either just exit your console and reload it, or you can verbosely tell it to reload one file. I usually just exit the thing. Either that, or I'm horribly mistaken and confused.
Well, you can also do reload bang, and that'll just reload everything.
Thank you. So this. Learn something all the time. Thank you. Cool. So now we have the Mr. T beer app. Cool. What are there's a bunch of different validators. There's a length validator. You know, we could require the name to be more than one character if we wanted. We could require it to be less than. I think the default string character size in the database is probably 255. Let's say we wanted to enforce some sort of name sanity. We would do I think, yeah, I think this is I think this will work. So let's see if I can trigger this. I might have my min max syntax messed up.
Do minimum to and max.
Yeah, that's probably what it is, isn't it? Usually what I do is I just look at old projects and remember. Okay, you guys, yeah. Okay, here we go. Oh yeah, so let's do a little. If you copy and paste your old code, it doesn't count. So you can see here I have a length argument, and I'm passing it a hash, a maximum, minimum, and a message too, so I can tell my users why this is failing. Ruby probably will give me somewhat, or Rails will probably give me somewhat sane default messages, but I always specify a message. So if we do There we go. Cool. You can just kind of keep building on. I'll counsel that it's really easy to overblow this. You can think of, oh, a beer is never going to be a one-letter name, but you better be sure of that because it kind of sucks when I've definitely found in my experience that tighter model layer validations can cause some problems because you're relying on yourself to be able to anticipate the entire universe of acceptable data. There are no edge cases. You put this in the model, and it's like there are no beers with one-letter names. Period. You know, if someone brews a beer with one-letter name, they're going to have to rename it. So you want to think about that before you get too crazy with this. That being said, they're very useful though to protect your database against getting cruffed. There are other places you can put similar type of code. I would suggest for something like a name, doing a minimum length might be kind of, you better be really, really, really sure. You can do something like maybe put a little line of JavaScript to count the length. If someone puts a one-character name, to just do a little pop-up, be like, are you sure? So you can do a little like nagware in your users maybe to try to make sure there's no typos, but still keep your database a little bit more permissive and flexible for the future. So this is I haven't really figured out a happy median as a developer. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts.
I've never done it.
Yeah, I used to validate the hell out of my stuff, and then it actually became a problem because I found out I didn't anticipate every single instance.
Yeah, I do the minimum possible, like just the known things that I know are bad, like, this thing has to be a number or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever, like, but yeah.
That's cool. So I'll give you guys a tour of some code over here with some validations to give you guys an idea, and then I thought it'd be fun to write a custom validator. This is kind of a cool thing. Some tricks. You can put 2 attributes on one line. So this is cool. Sometimes you see, I actually have I'm kind of violating my own thing here. I have some pretty tight validations for last name. One of these reasons is because I know that we won't hire anyone with any odd foreign names that are that crazy. But this is something. If this was an application to be used around the world, people can have last names of a single character, I'm sure, somewhere, and that would be bad, right? Here we have email. You can see presence isn't required. I'm using format, which is really cool. And then this is just a constant. I'm just calling in a regular expression. So you can use the format with syntax and validators to validate things with regular expressions. It's super helpful for email addresses. Phones, ain't no phones have no letters in them. So I don't, so I'm defending against that, defending against some digits there.
Can you show your projects?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's see if I can find them. Where'd I put them?
Oh, I thought you had it at the top.
No, I'm sure. No, I've got them mixed in somewhere. People methods probably. Oh, there we go. Cleaning. No. There it is. I did not write this email, regex. I wrote all the others. This thing came from the inner tubes. You won't find a single regular expression that actually will validate all the they're always like 98%. So use that.
Just in case, you will not regex visualize.
I'm sorry?
Visualize as a regex.
It
has a visualize on the internet.
Oh, you the visualizer. Yeah, there's a lot of great regular expression tools that help you sort of visualize what's going on, test things, and things like that. The only thing I'll say here is there are a couple of unique things about regular expressions. I think in Ruby, this I flag at the end makes it case insensitive, so that's kind of a shortcut. They begin and end with the slash, just like in Perl and PHP and all the other goodness. Many times they begin with a cache and end with or a caret. They begin with a caret and end with a cache. but that is unsafe in Ruby. And I can't remember why, but I've had this drilled into my head. Does anyone know that? While using regular expressions in Ruby, you want to use the alternate beginning and end syntax. So this A matches the beginning of the string, this /Z matches the end, as opposed to a normal regex, which is a caret sign and a cash sign. So it would be like, where's caret? I never even used the damn thing. Yeah. And then, right, I think that's the old way to do it. Anyway, use the A and Z. Just remember that. Yep.
No, I think actually all my regexes look like that.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, it's like something like Ruby.
Why is that?
I don't know.
I guess that's what you're asking. I guess.
It's something. Here we go. It's something. Anyways.
Specific for that use.
Yeah.
Blanket case.
Anyway, that's good homework. I've learned this. I've convinced myself of it. Then I've forgotten and gone and relearned it. So I've just told my brain that I've decided that I'm not going to use anything but A and Z. So if you find out I'm wrong, let me know. Corey, don't want to get too sidetracked on regular expressions. They're a subject in of themselves. The point is, though, you can use them to match patterns, and that's really useful for certain types of data. You can see I've got all kinds of stuff that's just validating with required. Numericality is another really awesome validator that says it has to be a number of some kind. That's super fun. There's all kinds of cool validators available in the guide here. So I encourage you guys to kind of just check this out. Ways to skip validations, errors, acceptance. You can validate associated models, and so you guys can see this. This gets pretty deep, pretty fast. Yeah, format. You can see what I did there. Inclusion. Oh yeah. Okay. Wow. This is really cool. I didn't know about this. You can check to see if it's included in an array. That's pretty sweet. So let's say you have a size, and you see what's going on here. They're making sure that size is either small, medium, or large. By in Ruby, arrays have an include question mark method. I think that's not Rails. That's Ruby, right? That will let you know. So if you do %w phone email. Just gives me yeah, probably because I did that. Cool. So that's just taking advantage of some basic. This inclusion keyword is like that because of that include method, I'm sure. I did not know you could do this. That's pretty cool. Looks like you can actually spit back the submitted value to the users. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. There's also within length. We have a length can be is. This is a cool little length validator. You can do in. This is a range. Yeah, I didn't know you could do this. That's really cool. Anyone use this before in validations? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I hope this is not a thread or a cross-site scripting.
What's that?
Yeah, you can, maybe you can put cross-site scripting in your account and then find the array before. And when you output it without escaping, then we have a cross-site scripting issue on this side. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
because it's not validated, and if you output it it's not validated. Yeah, but you output it, and when you don't escape your output, escape your output.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so that's a good point. Yeah, so this is.
You would be returning it as a string anyway.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't matter.
Yeah, it looks like it's cut, but that's a good point. Yeah, it could be. Probably thank God for Rails. Probably we can be dumb and just do it, and it'll probably be okay. This is cool. So you can actually have different messages for different types of failures. So you can see you can get this stuff pretty wrapped up. Oh my God! Yeah. Inverse of, absence, uniqueness. That is an interesting validation. It's a really good one for a user model. If you want people to only have one email in your database, that's handy. I've always done that in the database layer myself. So I didn't know you could do that. Oh, jeez. Okay, cool. What happens though if you? What happens if you have a validation for something that specific domain logic that was not anticipated by the Rails maintainers, a custom validator? Has anyone done this before?
Yeah, I don't really remember. I mean, you just basically write a method that gets called and you return, I don't know. I forget you return a boolean or.
That's basically it. Yeah, let's see if we can remember together. So the case is, so this is an application I wrote. It's an employee. Yeah, okay, cool. So employees can be paid hourly or daily, but they can't be paid both. So I wanted to write a validator that says, only give me one of these, and I need one. You need to specify an hourly rate or a salary, right? But not both at the same time. And at that point, I couldn't think of any way to do it with the standard methods, although now I see how I could probably do it pretty easily with some of the cool stuff in there. So I wrote my own custom validator. And the first step to this is you specify this just like normal, except instead of validates, it's validate. I have no idea why. It's the most confusing thing ever. And then you pass it a symbol. The symbol needs to correspond to a method name. This is a very common active record convention with callbacks. Many times you're going to give active record a keyword followed by a symbol, that symbol mapping to a method name. And then here I actually have this method. I have it behind a private keyword in my model. That just means that I can't call this from outside the model's internals. If I actually tried to call pay validator in my console, it would break. And I would just do this to organize my code a little bit so people could read this and they would see this and they would be clear that these methods are only to be used inside of the active record object itself. They're not exposed in the public API. Anyone think of any other reason to use the private keyword? Yeah, it's definitely not necessary. Another argument I've heard is if you're writing code and let's say you're on a big team or you're writing a gem that the public might be using, by putting this and you're communicating to people, it's like, look, I make no promises that this method isn't going to change without documenting it. This stuff, this is my public API. It's, this stuff is for everyone to use. This stuff, like, you don't be using this because it might break. You can't rely on it. It's not part of the public API for this class. But anyway, you can see this is pretty ugly code, but it's an if statement by and or, right? I just have a couple of comparison statements. It's been a while since I've looked at this. And then, if this returns true, I do errors.add. I add the error to the actual attribute, and then I just give it a string. So what I'm doing is I'm essentially shoveling an error message onto the errors queue, into the errors handling, and that's magically going to show up in my views thanks to Rails for the most part. So that's as easy as it is. The basic thing is, if you want to do a custom validation, you simply have to write a method that's going to have the behavior you want. And then I'm dealing this by adding errors and having, like, this has been about 6 months since I've written this, and this works. I believe this will cause it, keep it from being saved in the database. Is that your? I don't think I could just return a Boolean.
Yeah,
or could
I think you're right. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just see this error that thing.
Because you'd think you could do something like But my if this is true, then that's actually bad. So it's sort of not written very well. But you could do that, right? And say, okay, this would be an intuitively attractive thing to think. I just need a method that returns true or false based on whether or not my criteria pass. So here I am checking. It's like, do I have a bad criteria state? Yes. Okay, we'll give back false. Sort of convoluted, right? But that would make sense. So apparently that doesn't work. Instead of returning false, you actually shovel errors on. And what Rails is doing is it's checking the errors attribute. It's actually an attribute, I think, to see if there's anything in there. And if there isn't something in the errors, then it's assuming that something blew up and rejecting it. So I'm doing a little hackery of the. Yeah, it's kind of weird. This is pretty convoluted. I mean, this is pretty poor code from this standpoint. That like, yeah, it's like if things are bad, so it should be like unless things are bad, pass. Here is something I was trying to do. I was trying to figure out if I could do it so that hourly rates couldn't be below minimum wage. But I never got this to work, so I turned it off. So this is another use of it. Validations. Any questions? You guys know about this? How I got this cool schema information above my model file? This is like my favorite thing ever. It's a gem called Annotate. Yeah, it's awesome. It's a gem.
Oh, it's a gem?
Yeah, called Annotate. And I love it because it throws this in front of also it throws it in your spec as well, so you can remember what the hell you actually have in your model file, which is kind of nice.
How do you pull it up, or is it just automatically there?
Good question. Well, you put it in your gem file just like any other gem, and then you just call Annotate, and it will go through and it will basically compare its current annotations up versus your schema, and it changes it. So if you change your database, the procedure would be make a migration, run rake db migrate, then run annotate, and it'll all be up there for you.
Why don't you add it to that?
Cool. Let's do a custom method. What do we want to? Let's do an ABV floor. How about that? So this is Mr. T's beer shop, and there's no Wimpy beer. So beer string. Cool. Well, that's not going to work right there. Give it the private keyword. You don't need to indent after the private keyword, but sometimes it's nice so you remember. Cool. So far, I've simply, I'm just going to define an instance method, just like any other Ruby class. So if self.beer string gth is less than 4.5, and what did that want? Does that just want a syntax? No, it needs the there's the add. It wants the right. Cool.
I think you want ABV less than 4.5. I don't think beer strength is an attribute.
Yeah, thank you. Getting tired too.
You need an update on that.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Do people understand what's going on with the self.abv business? self is a keyword which refers to the object in the current scope. So if you're defining an instance method, self says the current beer instance method. Does that make sense? I could also just do this. These are equivalent. I've started doing self because I think it's a little bit more verbose and clear. So if you see self, just remember self is referring to like the current. Can anyone describe it? It's the current scoped object. That you'll see it also. Here's self in another scope, just a method definition. In this case, self actually refers to the class. This is adding a class method, not an instance method. And because we're in the class, all I'm doing is I'm just, public methods is a method that active record gives you. So I'm just being stupid there. This is an instance method. And self in here refers to the instance, so I'm just calling an attribute. What did I say? Some method. Yeah, there we go. It worked. It gave me all of the public methods available to that class. I call another. Does that make sense? It's one of those. I know it took me a little while to grok. Just remember, self just refers to the thing in the current scope. If the current scope is the class, it's the class. If it's the instance, it's the instance. So this is just saying, look, if whatever object we're dealing with right now, if its attribute ABV is less than 4.5, then blow up. And so let's see if this works. Okay, now we have a new beer. Yeah, okay, what's another beer, guys? Anchor. Can I spell Anchor? Anchor Steam. You know, it's actually called Steam, and Anchor is a brewery. There we go. Oh, okay, that's an interesting. See how I got a capital 2? It threw that thing in front of it, so to make this a little bit nicer, I could just do something like that. Cool. Custom validators and Rails models. Should we start? You guys want to start talking about something else? Do a little more playing around with this? What do you think? How about let's see if we can cover callbacks pretty quick. Callbacks are a thing. I like to do it like this. My model organized. So callbacks are Devin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Devin called callbacks hooks earlier, and I think that's a really good way to think of them. They are hooks into the active record lifecycle, or the lifecycle of a database object, that allow you to run arbitrary code at certain points. And these are very useful. They're actually too useful because people, including myself, overuse the hell out of them, and that's really bad. But before we get into when to use them and when not, these are all of the These are all of the hooks that are available. You can see they're pretty. You can hook into damn near every stage in the life cycle. Common ones are before save. It's a really common one. Before or after destroy, pretty common one, right? But also, you can do a lot of stuff before validation. This is really nice if you have some tight validations, and let's say you have a phone number validation where you want your phone number to be only 10 digits, but you want users to be able to throw in all these hyphens and stuff like that, you could use a before validation callback to strip out all that junk before the validations are called, allowing the users to flexibly input phone numbers, but still keeping those tight validations and ensuring your data is clean. So that's an example of a callback. Let's write that. Well, we don't have a phone number. Let me show you. Well, I don't have that code written handy. But does that example make sense?
So when someone's, as they're typing in their phone number, it's doing something?
Also, good question. So, no. So, let's just write one. This is stupid, but let's do it to show you an example. So, before validation, fix name. Cool? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it that before validation keyword. Sorry, I'm flipping everywhere here. Right? And then I'm passing it as an argument, a symbol, which is going to correspond to a method name. And I'm going to put that in the private too. And then we're going to do if self.name.length equals 1. Let's go. I wanted to do something that would allow us to get around validations, just to demonstrate the validation. But this code should basically nuke the fact that we have a minimum validation, because this is every time before validations are run now, it's going to call this code, which I think is going to, if the name is only 1, it's going to actually overwrite the name and throw some gibberish at the end, which should prevent us from ever subbing. So you could write smarter code and use that to actually clean something. Like if you had fixed phone, you could do self.phone. Usub is a method that takes the first thing and replaces it with the second. So right there, that's going to clean out any hyphens.
So basically, when they leave that part of the form and go somewhere else, then it'll.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Let's Oh. Cool. You notice my Racer 5 name has been capitalized. I added a new line to it for some stupid reason. Well, the reason that was capitalized is because we gave it a callback that was supposed to be run before validations. Validations are run before the record's created. Does that make sense?
So say you're filling out a form.
And
then eventually when you're done, you hit like submit or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
So there's before validation and then validation. When does validation happen when you hit submit, and then before validation happens when you go to the next part of the form?
Oh, okay. So that's a good question, and it has to do with more with how Rails works. So when you hit submit on a form, you're posting to a route, right? And Rails is going to take that post request and map it to a controller action. So it's probably going to be called create, right? In that controller action, you might do all kinds of things, but one thing you're going to do is do something like, new beer equals beer.new, and or something probably like equals beer.new stuff from the form here, right? And then you're going to do new beer.save. In that create controller action. Then you're probably going to have some logics like, look, check to see if it's saved. If it's saved, then I'm going to redirect the user to the home page and say, congratulations, you have a new beer. If it didn't, I'm going to send it back to the form. So in that, when you call save on that object, that's when that active record lifecycle stuff starts kicking in. So one of the things that's going to happen before it hits the database is it's going to call any validations. And that's like built in. No matter what you do, any active record model is going to, by default, before save, as part of the steps getting there, is going to check to see, do you have any validations, and it's going to run those. Pretty much no matter what you do. This callback is going to say, hey, before you run validations, run this code. So it's like, you can think of it stacking it in front. And so that's why this callback in particular is really useful to perform some data cleaning prior to validations. So it can allow you to have slightly tighter validations than you might otherwise be able to do because you can programmatically clean stuff. Another common use of this would be to make sure your emails are downcase. There's a method called downcase, and so you can do self.email downcase. You could title, let's say you want your names to always start with a capital letter. Those are good things you could insert before validation if you were certain it wouldn't cause any problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And all of these callbacks here, these are all associated with creating an object in the database. So there's a lot. There's before, after, before save, around save, before create, around create, after save. So there's all kinds of stuff. Same thing with updating and same thing with destroy. So callbacks are infinitely flexible. So let's do something. Create account at some API. Cool. And then we're gonna do create account at some service. Call API, I should call it service, right? Let's say you have, this is an example, let's say you have a service that stores credit cards for you in a compliant way, and you want to, before you save a new payment, you want to take that credit card number and you want to stash it off from the service and then get back a token. Cool, right? So classic thing would do is like, let's call, before save, right? Cool. Go to store to create account at third party. Cool. And then you would do before destroy remove account. Does this make sense? This is sort of pseudocode, but you can see what I'm trying to get at. These last two are a horrible idea. Never do that. Does anyone know why? People do it. I do it. We're guilty of it. What's that? Maybe not an API, but yeah, it probably should be pushed off to some other type of code. It too tightly couples. I mean, this creating an account on a third-party service. I mean, this is like a thing that needs doing, right? And what we're doing is we're shoehorning it into saving a record. Well, this is a giant pain in the ass because now we can't create a record without creating an account. Well, God help you running tests, right? Let's say you need to create 10,000 sample things for your test database. You really want to like sit there while it's creating 10,000 accounts at your external API. You write the code like this, you're going to have a hell of a time not doing that. By writing callbacks that tightly couple, the rule of thumb is that if a callback is completely concerned with the internal state of the object, it's probably a good use of callbacks. So this first one is a pretty good use of callbacks. It's simple. It doesn't rely on any other bit of the application, any third-party service, any internet connectivity, anything. is simply contain. These are very different. This is now tying our simple active record model, nice sweet little thing, to some sort of API business, which requires a library, probably a gem, internet connectivity. There's going to be a massive lag, and your life is going to suck. And this is really, really, really common in Rails programming. It's really bad idea. I know this from experience because I've sat there watching my test go, yeah, you're just like, fuck. Like 10 minutes for like 500 examples, right? You don't want that. There is a better way. Can anyone think of a, I mean, like, what would be the simplest way to get this code out of the model layer? Controller. Was that what you were going to say?
Well, I was thinking more like using like a background worker queue.
That'd be an advanced way to do it, probably, right?
It's got something similar, and
yeah, it's a facade. I mean, this inherently maybe it's not bad. It has a facade pattern that points to a message queue, right?
Right. I mean, I wouldn't wait for the result of that. I think kicking
you just kick it off.
As
Yeah.
part of committing a record to your database makes sense. Waiting for it synchronously does not make sense, especially if you're talking about.
Yeah, totally. So that's a good a good improvement. You could, instead of just having the whole thing just wait while it's talking to the third party, you could shovel this off into some background job thing and say, look, or queue it up in the database to do it midnight or something, right? Just do it asynchronously. And that's a good improvement. That'll speed tests, but it still doesn't allow you to separate these two concerns in the application. You still can't create, every time you create a record, you're still creating a queue. That's better than creating an account. Another alternative would be, may or may not be better, would be to put this in the controller layer, right? So the benefit of that is now we've thinned down our model and we've kept our model narrowly concerned about what it needs to be concerned about, but we've sort of just moved the problem to the controller, which is sort of better, I guess. But then we have nasty controller code that's doing a bunch of stuff. This is sort of a problem in Rails, and the best solution I've come up with is a pattern called service objects. So I have an application where I create a new supporter for an organization, and I need to do two things in addition to saving them in the database. I want to subscribe them to my email list, and I want to create a profile for them with my credit card storing provider. Two things, right? So I'll just show you guys the code. What you can do is, where are we? So I start in the controller. Here's what I'm doing. So first of all, I'm saving the supporter, right? Okay, if I get in the database, right, then I'm going to do this thing called new supporter tasks, and that's just a method down here. It's a little cluttered, but what I want to point out is I'm creating a new thing called a service object. I'm passing it some things that I think it needs, and I'm calling a method on that returns a Boolean. So the point is, if you have things that you are tempted to put in callbacks that are touching other parts of your application or other services, that's pretty much a code smell. And if it's something that is a result of a user action, you might think about using something called a service object pattern to refactor that out. And if you look at the services, here's my service. It's just I have service base, but that's okay. Yeah, so it's a plain old Ruby object, right? And I'm creating some stuff, and I'm basically passing it off to two other service objects, storing profiles, queuing up updates, and then here's my
the services folder is not part of the conventional.
That's correct.
Ruby conventions, right?
Yep. Here, I'm breezing through this code. I know it's sort of convoluted, but this is where I'm making this is the AP. This is basically the call to the API right here. It's these two things. That's where I'm storing this thing.
It raises a general interesting issue because of the decoupled.
But I'm not doing it asynchronously, which is a good. I'm doing it synchronously, so I'm still blocking, which I don't really care about because this is a really low volume app. But yeah, that would be a massive problem. But Dennis is right. So service objects are a really common pattern. There's a Rails class on them. They're just plain old Ruby classes that create objects that do shit. That's all. And it allows you to put the code to do shit elsewhere, aside from the boilerplate Rails code. One of the things in Rails applications people get really bad about is throwing everything in the model, and your model becomes this grab bag of code that basically doesn't fit anywhere else. You got really nice views with no domain logic in your view. Controllers, they're so clean, there's 2 methods. And your models are like hundreds and hundreds of lines of shit that completely is unrelated. And you can break that up into multiple files, but
Everybody's thinking fat model thin controller, right?
Which is actually, you should have thin models, thin controllers, and probably other stuff too. Yeah, so service objects are a thing. I read the founder of Rails is sort of a famous. He's rather abrupt on email, to put it nicely, and sort of reacts harshly to any criticism that Rails isn't perfect for everything out of the box. But he actually admits he uses service objects too. So.
I think I add that to the event. It seems to address a lot of the system architecture.
So right there.
System architecture issues.
Totally, yeah. It's like to me, it's using service objects is one of my favorite things to do. That allows somewhat cleaner controller code, cleaner models. I really started to think myself that you're to kind of go back to active record models. You can see all the stuff we can do with them, and you started to see how we can throw in these arbitrary methods and expand these things and do all kinds of interesting things with the models. And there's a temptation to just throw stuff in there. And that'll be a problem because then you'll forget where you put shit. So as you do this, as you put more stuff in the model and leverage more of this power, think about how you can refactor that into other things. There's the obvious ways of just moving it into include files or modules, which kind of every programming language has that ability to push off a file and pull it in. That's nice. It organizes your stuff in files, but it doesn't maintain any sort of separation of concerns in your overall application architecture. Rails is just a framework written on Ruby. You have all the Ruby stuff right there. So there's no reason not to use simple Ruby classes and simple Ruby objects to refactor these things and use standard object-oriented programming to clean up Rails. That's all I got. It's late. Any questions or anything before we go? We welcome feedback. If you guys have any thoughts, you can email us at team.
Need to do part 2. Somebody's going to need to do part 2. Maybe I'll try to take in.
Yeah, we should do a part 2 on models.
Relations.
Yeah, we should do a part 2 on relations, scopes.
And then scopes.
Scopes.
Also.
Yeah. Models, yay! I'm glad you get. This is like my favorite part of Rails, actually. I think they're kind of the easiest to get, and they're really powerful. You don't really need to know that much about Rails to understand models. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks.
Oh no. Where is the I think we lost. Did we lose the Hangout? No, it looks like it's still there.